Apprentice Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, 5th Ed D&D. We last left off, we began to dive into wilderness, and we talked about one of the ways that you can handle traveling throughout the wilderness, the montage use. Let's talk about the other one, hour by hour. The fact is, if the journey itself is just important as the destination, if the journey itself is an adventure, then you want to use hour by hour, because you're going to make it that this overall journey, this traversing of the various terrains and travels through it, is part of the adventure. The journey across whatever wilderness is going to be as exciting and as adventure-filled as wherever the players may end up. And traveling there, exploring and discovering, should be an integral part of this. You want to make sure that you are filling it with even more details, and you're not going to just want as simple a details as you want. You will need more details to draw your players in and to make them recognize what's going on here and see it's important. Just in the same way that extra detail is going to be important for party order. The fact is that whoever is in the front of your party will be effectively leading them, navigating, checking in front for enemies. Whoever is in the back, going to make sure they're not being followed or being surprised. Even if there's people in the middle, you want to encourage them to do things that relate to the journey itself. Maybe someone foraging for food while they're going along, or looking out for water, picking up any materials they might need. Another person could be working on a map. So you can see that you can have your group of adventurers doing things that relate to this very adventure, and getting this little detail helps out to embellish what's going on and make them feel more connected with this, as I said, hour by hour travel. Now you're going to want to make sure to have both a combination of planned encounters and random encounters. If you're using a planned encounter, it should be for some kind of location that the players are going to come across. That's how you're going to use it. Once they come across this location, you have an encounter there. You've planned out for them to visit this place, see it, understand it, and then get it. You sort of could have used this before as part of your montages, but now this location is much more detailed and is a place for them to possibly explore and check out. You still might want to have random encounters, of course, and the fact is you're probably going to have more random encounters than planned encounters. The random encounters, their location will be less important, but even adding a little bit of detail as to where upon their journey they're running into this will be important to help you draw your characters in more. Fact is, you're not going to want to have each of these encounters be the same. The more similar they are, the more boring it gets, the more cookie cutter it is. You're going to want to do things, change up the direction of attack, change up the kind of encounter it's going to be. Terrain changes, various ways that the encounter is played out, different things that they may encounter. A lot of details can be altered to make it have a variety in the way that you're handling both a combination of the random encounters they're going to have and the possible planned ones. Having variety will mean that they're going to be more engaged in this. Also, you should have ways for them possibly to gain treasure or interesting adventuring hooks. Things like ruined campsites, old buildings, possibly even some signs of ancient ruins. Both could function as a way of getting adventuring hooks if you especially want to do something like small side stories or small adventures that veer off from this main quest, especially if you're doing a campaign. Or as a possible way that they could find a couple of small items and gain a little bit of treasure along the way, a little bit of items that are rewards for their journey. Maybe they come across the abandoned camp of the bandits they just had fought a little while ago. They get a couple of things that the bandits didn't have traveling on them that they feel that they can take as a reward because they already defeated them. Now this travel journey could take multiple sessions. You should be prepared depending on the level that you're planning out. The fact is also that in between your encounters, in between the locations that your characters will be visiting, you want to be prepared to use some of the montage system in order to basically supplement it. Because the fact is, if you have long periods of time between encounters, or even long periods of time between various locations they might visit, you want to, in effect, just move quickly through there to the next part. You don't want to bog yourself down. Now let's start talking about mapping a wilderness. The fact is, mapping a wilderness seems very different than mapping a dungeon. A dungeon has constraints, while a wilderness could be infinitely large, technically. It could go as far as you wish for the wilderness itself to go to stretch to. So you can see it already feels like a much more daunting task. You have limited options. Your players can go in any direction. You have to ask yourself a couple questions. How do you deal with the fact that your events or your encounters, that you might have spent a lot of time planning out your locations, they could somehow veer off and never even find it, never even encounter it? Or how do you keep them from getting bored in the situation because they might just be wandering about, never finding anything, never encountering anything? You are going to need to do a little bit of effort, which is not impossible to do, to make sure you avoid these situations. But it is possible. You have to think about it on a dungeon scale almost. Think about it this way. If I put natural features, or even unnatural features, roads, hunting trails, ridges, valleys, stream beds, these are places that people want to travel along because they're easier to travel along when you're crossing over wilderness areas. By mapping these out, you're encouraging your players to follow along certain paths. Granted, you might still want to provide them with options, but this is a way that you basically can keep them on rails to a degree. Even hunters in deserts use traditional ways, and they could learn of these pathways that these hunters use. You can also move around the locations you have. Feel free to move encounters or locations from one place to another in order for your players to encounter them. You are not constrained 100% by your map. A lot of times these encounters and locations might not be ones they know about. If they know about it on the map, they might decide to go visit it. If they don't know about it, then they will come across it wherever you feel is appropriate for them to come across it. If you're going to use the basically provincial level, which is 1 hex equals 1 mile for your mapping, make sure to have all those details of the roads, the path, the ridges, the valleys, everything mapped out so you have a general idea of the directions that your players could traverse this landscape. If you're at that level, you're going to want to make sure to keep up with an idea of all the hamlets and locations your players are going to be meeting along those traversal planes. It is very important that whatever you place within any hex, when your players enter into it, they will be able to find what that is, unless it's specifically hidden. This doesn't mean they'll find it right away. There could be hints, pathways, something that will link to whatever it will be, whether it's a ruined castle or a small village that maybe there's going to be a sign nearby. You want to make sure to fill in some of these things and get an idea of what is in every one of these hexes, just to give a general consensus to what your players will be coming across against these different things. Some hexes might just be road, might just be forest. Others might have that village, or have that ruins. This is really what you're going to be using for the hour by hour. If you're using more on a day by day scale, which means we're moving up from there closer towards what that montage level is, you still want an idea of the trail your characters are going to go on, then you're probably going to use more of a scale of 1 mile equals about 1 hex equals about 6 miles. When you're using this, you don't have to have the same level of detail as you had before. It will still be important to note any kind of major sort of thoroughfares they might travel along, but you won't need all the sort of crossroads or things like that they might possibly turn upon. I'm using the road loosely as to any of the things I've talked about before, of course. Don't use every terrain feature, only those key ones that are important to you. You should note changes in major elevation because players can still notice it even at this level when they're heading up into the hills, when they see a mount in the distance, things like that. And any major changes in the terrain that they're traveling into. If they move out of a forest into fields, or move from fields into forests, or walk into a swamp, it's important to note when they're going to be doing this. So, that's it for today. We continue to talk about the wilderness. We basically talked about the other approach to traveling in the wilderness, the hour-by-hour approach, which makes the wilderness part of the adventure. Traveling through it, part of your quest. And I talked about what it means to do that and the entire process of traveling across a terrain, a wilderness, as the adventure. Then we began to talk about mapping your wilderness, which seems daunting in its limitless nature. But I have come up with some suggestions to help limit it to you, and to help correct the fact that your players may go anywhere by placing major landmarks and encounters anywhere. Pretty much being able to move them, especially if they're not marked on any kind of map your players have, it makes it easy. I could place it in front of them whenever it seems appropriate. I finished up with some more details about mapping it out, and the different scales you'll be using and what kind of things you're going to be adding in to correct some of the problems that might occur. In the next episode, we're going to talk about wilderness hazards, and dive into that section, because just like dungeon hazards, except it's a lot more open. There's a lot more different things you can use for wilderness hazards, and a lot more details that we're going to go on about that when it comes to traversing the wilderness. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon. Link in the description below. There's some great rewards. It helps to grow and improve the channel. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.